My husband told me for 16 years that we couldn't afford to fix the roof. Then I found a property deed in his gym bag with a woman's name on it, and his. I said nothing. I made dinner. I waited. What I did next took everything he thought he'd hidden and gave it back to me. Hello, and welcome. I'm so glad you found your way here. I'm Vivian, and if this is your first time, I hope you'll stay a while. Before I start, please subscribe and leave me a comment telling me which city you're listening from. I love knowing how far these stories travel. People who have never been controlled by money don't understand what it does to a person's sense of reality. It hollows something out. You start to distrust your own instincts, your own memory, your own sense of what's reasonable. You stop asking questions because you already know the answer will make you feel small. I know this because I lived inside that hollowing for 16 years, and I didn't even have a name for it until the day it ended. My name is Lorraine Whitfield. I'm 53 years old, and I live in a detached house on a quiet street in Oakville, Ontario, the kind of street where people shovel their neighbors' driveways in February without being asked and wave from cars, even when they're running late. I have a vegetable garden in the back that I've been threatening to expand for years, a daughter named Melissa who teaches French immersion in Hamilton, and a sister named June who has always known me better than I've known myself. For 16 years, I was also married to a man named Gordon Whitfield. Gordon was an engineer, structural, which felt appropriate in retrospect because he had a gift for construction that was invisible until you looked at it from the right angle. He built things that looked solid from the outside and were hollow in the middle. He built our marriage that way. He was 44 when we married. I was 37. Melissa was 9 from my first relationship, and Gordon had no children of his own. He was attentive with her in those early years, patient in a way that I mistook for genuine warmth. Later, I would understand that his patience was a performance, but in those first years, I believed it completely. That's the thing about a careful person. Their carefulness looks like love. He took over our finances 6 months into the marriage. This was framed as practical. He earned more. He was better with numbers. And I was still building my bookkeeping practice from the ground up. It made a certain kind of sense. I handled the home, the cooking, Melissa's school logistics, the social calendar. He handled the money. That arrangement calcified over years into something that no longer required discussion. It simply was. The first time I felt something wrong was not a moment. It was a slow accumulation of small incorrectnesses. The roof. We needed a new roof for 3 years before Gordon would agree to have it done, and when he finally agreed, he presented it as a sacrifice. We'd have to defer the bathroom renovation. We couldn't afford both. We couldn't afford much of anything, according to Gordon. We were comfortable, he said, but not wealthy. Not the kind of people who took 2 vacations a year or upgraded the car before it had 200,000 kilometers on it. I believed him. He was the one who saw the bank statements. I missed Melissa's convocation from Teachers College because the hotel rates in Ottawa were, according to Gordon, absurd that weekend, and we'd already spent too much on the holidays. I remember the way she said it was fine, her voice going carefully neutral in the way it did when she was trying not to show me that it wasn't. I carried that moment around for years like a stone in my pocket. I missed my friend Deborah's 50th birthday trip to Portugal because Gordon said the timing was bad and the dollar was weak. I missed my nephew's wedding in Vancouver because the flights were ridiculous and we could send a gift. I stopped asking about things I wanted because the answer was always a variation of the same story. We're fine, but we need to be careful. We're doing okay, but let's not push it. The first signal I should have paid more attention to came about 3 years ago. Gordon started going to a Saturday morning spin class at a gym I didn't know he'd joined. He'd never been interested in spin classes. He'd never been interested in any gym. Truthfully, I noted this and pushed it down somewhere. The second signal came the following winter. I found a receipt in his gym bag when I was looking for his health card, which he'd asked me to locate for a prescription. The receipt was from a restaurant in Burlington called Archer's Table. Dinner for two, $187. Gordon had told me he'd worked late that Saturday. I held the receipt for a moment. Then I put it back. He treated a client, I told myself. That's the sort of thing Gordon does. The third signal I cannot fully forgive myself for ignoring. His phone buzzed on the kitchen counter one morning while he was in the shower, and the name that appeared was simply Biba. One name, no last name. Familiar shorthand. I saw it. I looked away. I told myself it was probably a colleague. Something had shifted inside me by then, but I had become so practiced at pushing things down that I did it again without even noticing. I started paying attention differently after that. Not dramatically. Quietly. The way you might turn up the volume on something you'd been half hearing for years. I noticed that Gordon always got to the mailbox before I did. I noticed he'd set a password on his laptop, which had always been open on the kitchen table before. I noticed that once every few weeks he drove into Burlington alone on a Saturday afternoon, citing errands, and came back 2 hours later in an unusually good mood. And then came the Tuesday afternoon in late October that changed everything. Gordon was at a site inspection. I was cleaning out the front hall closet, which had become a repository for every bag and jacket neither of us wanted to deal with. I pulled out his gym bag to move it, and something shifted inside it, heavier than I expected. I unzipped it. Underneath his water bottle and his workout gloves was a manila envelope, unsealed. I don't know exactly what made me open it. I have thought about this many times. Maybe it was 3 years of small signals finally reaching a threshold. Maybe it was just the weight of the thing, unexpected in my hands. I sat down on the front hall bench and opened it. Inside were 3 documents. The first was a property deed. A house in Burlington registered to Gordon James Whitfield and Beatrice Ann Kowalski as joint tenants. The second was a home inspection report dated 14 months prior. The third was a mortgage statement showing a current balance of $412,000 on a property purchased for $685,000. I sat in my front hallway in my socks and read those pages 3 times. A house. Gordon owned a house with a woman named Beatrice Ann Kowalski. A house in Burlington. On the Saturdays when he drove into Burlington for errands. We couldn't afford to fix the roof. I sat there for a long time. Then I did something that surprised me. I did not cry. I did not feel anger, not yet. What I felt was clarifying, almost cold. The feeling of a thing finally making sense that had never made sense before. I photographed every page with my phone, all 3 documents, every line. I sent the photos to an email address I created right there on the front hall bench, a Gmail account under a name Gordon didn't know, using data instead of our home network. Then I replaced everything exactly as I had found it, zipped the bag and put it back in the closet. I went to the kitchen and started making soup. When Gordon came home at 6, I asked him about the site inspection. He talked about it. I listened. I passed him the bread. His face was completely ordinary. I lay awake that night long after he fell asleep, and I did what I hadn't allowed myself to do in years. I let myself think clearly. A property valued at nearly $700,000. A joint mortgage with a woman named Beatrice. Saturday afternoon errands. The gym he'd joined when he'd never cared about gyms. The name Bia on his phone. The Saturday night receipt from Archer's table. The years of we can't afford it. The missed convocation. The missed wedding. The missed trip to Portugal. The roof that took 3 years to replace. I thought about Melissa. The way her voice had gone neutral on the phone when I told her I couldn't make it to Ottawa. She was 30 now. She never entirely stopped being careful around Gordon, something I had attributed to a stepchild's instinct and not examined more closely. By 4 in the morning, I had made a decision. I was not going to confront Gordon. Not yet. Not across the kitchen table where he had all his explanations ready. I was going to find out exactly what I was dealing with first. I was going to talk to a lawyer. I was going to do all of this without changing a single visible thing about my daily routine. Same soup on Tuesdays, same grocery runs, same Lorraine. I did not know anything about family law. I had been a bookkeeper for 20 years, and I could read a balance sheet, but I had not touched our personal finances in 16 years, and I understood only vaguely that Ontario had rules about matrimonial property. What I understood precisely was that a house purchased during a marriage, regardless of whose name was on the deed, might not belong entirely to Gordon. I needed someone who knew for certain. The following morning, I searched on my phone with private browsing turned on. I was looking for a family lawyer in the Hamilton area, someone with strong reviews who was not in Gordon's professional orbit. I found the name Renee Okafor of Okafor Sutherland Family Law in Hamilton. 15 years of practice. One reviewer had written that she was methodical and didn't miss things. That was the phrase I needed. I called from my car, parked around the corner from Melissa's old elementary school. The receptionist was warm and professional. I made an appointment for Thursday afternoon. I said my name was Lorraine. I said it was a consultation about a possible separation. The word felt strange in my mouth. Not wrong, exactly. Strange. The way the first honest word feels after a long time of approximate ones. Thursday, I told Gordon I was meeting my friend Susan for lunch in Hamilton. He nodded from the couch without really registering it. He had his own Thursday plans. I understood by then what those might be. Renee Okafor's office was on the second floor of a Victorian building on James Street North, tasteful and unhurried. She was a tall woman in her mid-40s with close-cropped hair and the manner of someone who had heard every version of every story and brought the same quality of attention to all of them. I liked her within 2 minutes. I placed the photograph documents on her desk. She studied them carefully. "When did you find these?" she asked. 4 days ago, I said. In his gym bag. I photographed everything and replaced it. Smart, she said, and I felt something strange at the word. Gordon had used that word for years as a way of telling me what not to do. Someone else was using it to describe what I had actually done. She asked about our finances, joint accounts, RRSP contributions, the mortgage on our Oakville home, my bookkeeping income, Gordon's salary. I answered what I could and said honestly that I didn't know the rest because he had managed everything. She explained Ontario's Family Law Act to me in language that was precise and useful. Under Ontario law, the increase in value of matrimonial property accumulated during the marriage is subject to equalization of net family property. The Burlington house, if purchased during our marriage with marital funds, regardless of whose name appeared on the deed, would factor into that calculation. The co-registrant's name didn't protect the asset. It complicated things, but it didn't protect them. She also mentioned a forensic accountant named Theodore Barnes, who worked with family law cases involving complex or potentially hidden assets. What I'd like you to do in the coming weeks, Renee said, is document quietly. Photograph any financial statements you come across. Note account numbers, unusual withdrawals, any property tax documents. Don't move anything. Don't change anything. Let me file when we're ready. I drove home feeling something I had not felt in a very long time. I felt like a participant in my own life rather than a passenger in someone else's version of it. But something was different when I got home. Gordon's car was in the driveway earlier than it should have been. He was in the kitchen when I came in. He had made himself tea, which he almost never did. He looked at me, and his face had a particular quality of stillness that I knew from years of living with him. It was the stillness of someone who was calibrating. "How was Susan?" he asked. "Good," I said, hanging up my coat. "We went to that Vietnamese place she likes on Barton." "She called the house," he said. The air changed. "About 45 minutes ago. I picked up because I thought it might be the furnace company." My phone had been on silent during the meeting with Renee. I hadn't checked it. "She probably got mixed up on the time," I said evenly. "I'll call her back." I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on and kept my back to him while I did it, because my face was doing something I couldn't entirely control. He didn't push further. He went back to his tea. But I knew something had registered. Gordon was a careful person. He was now more carefully watching. That evening, while he was watching television, I went through the filing cabinet in his home office, which he had never locked because I had never gone into it. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I was looking for anything real. In a green folder behind the vehicle insurance documents, I found a line of credit statement. Not from our joint bank, a personal line of credit at a different institution with a current balance of $0 and an available limit of $250,000. The statement showed that the limit had been drawn down substantially 18 months ago and repaid over the following year. The timing aligned almost exactly with the purchase of the Burlington property. My hands didn't shake. I photographed every page, sent them to my private email, deleted the sent folder. I replaced the statement in the green folder. I made decaf. I brought Gordon a cup without being asked because that was what I always did. He said, "Thanks," without looking up from the game. I sent the photographs to Renee the next morning. She connected me with Theodore Barnes within the week. He was a careful, methodical man who spoke in the measured way of someone accustomed to finding things in financial documents that people had hoped to conceal. He asked me to give him 2 weeks. I gave him 3. What Theodore's initial report uncovered was more detailed than I had expected. Gordon had been quietly servicing a separate financial life for at least 8 years. The line of credit had been used not only for the Burlington property, but for 2 preceding investments, a condo purchased and flipped in Stony Creek and a rental property in Brantford that had been sold 18 months before I found the envelope. The proceeds from those sales, Theodore estimated, totaled somewhere between $350,000 and $400,000 after mortgage repayment. That money had not appeared in any of our joint accounts. Gordon had been investing with a woman whose name was on the most recent title, and the pattern suggested that the arrangement had been both financial and personal for longer than I had known. I read Theodore's summary at my kitchen table on a Thursday morning and thought about 16 years of being told we were comfortable but needed to be careful. I thought about Susan's 50th in Portugal. I thought about Melissa's voice going neutral on the phone. Renee filed the application for divorce the following Tuesday. Gordon was served at his office. I was at the public library 2 kilometers from our house, reading a novel I could not have told you anything about afterward. My phone rang at 2:18 in the afternoon. Gordon. I let it go to voicemail, again. And then a text. Lorraine, we need to talk immediately. Please call me. I finished my chapter. I drove home. He was standing in the kitchen when I came in, still in his work clothes, the divorce application on the table in front of him. He had the expression of a man who has been caught in a way he had not calculated for. "What is this?" he said. Not a question, exactly. "You've been served," I said. "All communication should go through my lawyer from now on. Her name is Renee Okafor. Lorraine." His voice shifted into something careful and measured. "You don't have the full picture. There are aspects of this that have a straightforward explanation. I've been meaning to talk to you about the Burlington property for months. The timing just. It's more complicated than it looks. Then the court will have time to hear all of it," I said. I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed and pressed my hands flat on my knees until they steadied. He came upstairs 10 minutes later and stood in the doorway. The anger he'd been managing came through more clearly now under the reasoning. He said he was disappointed. He said he had built things for our future, and I was dismantling them without understanding them. He said that what looked suspicious from the outside had a rational explanation that I had never given him a chance to provide. He said I had been talking to people who were filling my head with ideas and that I was going to regret acting impulsively. "I'm not acting impulsively," I said. "I've been acting for 6 weeks." He left the room. The next few days were the difficult part. Not loud. Gordon was never loud, which was its own kind of difficulty. He moved through the house with a careful, wounded quality that was designed to make me feel responsible for the wound. He called Melissa, who called me anxious and confused, asking if I was sure, saying Dad seemed genuinely blindsided. He called our neighbor Keith, to, I assume, begin building the narrative in the community that this had come from nowhere. And then, on the 5th day, Beatrice arrived. I had not yet seen her. I had only her name on the deed, and the photograph Gordon had shown me without knowing it, by way of a receipt from a restaurant, on a Saturday night. She came to the house on a Saturday afternoon, with Gordon. She was perhaps 45, composed, dressed in the straightforward way of someone who doesn't need to try very hard. She sat in my living room with a quality of familiarity that told me she had likely been in it before on the Saturdays when I was at my sister's. Gordon introduced her as Beatrice Kowalski, his business partner and co-investor. Beatrice leaned forward in the armchair with the measured manner of someone who had prepared for this conversation. She explained that the properties had been structured as investment vehicles to protect them from tax exposure, that the joint title arrangement was a legal strategy, not a personal one, that everything that looked careful financial planning had been in reality that if I would simply allow them to walk me through the documents, I would see that nothing had been done with ill intent. I listened to all of it. Then I said, "You're the person he's been having dinner with on Saturday nights." Silence. Silence. I'm not going to sit in my living room and receive a financial explanation from the woman who was with my husband at Archer's table. When he told me he was working late, "If your name appears on any asset that is subject to equalization in our separation, Renee will be in touch with you." I stood up. "I'd like you both to leave now." Gordon's composure left him. He told me I was making an enormous error. He told me I didn't understand what I was walking away from. He said that Beatrice's involvement was purely professional and that I was poisoning a marriage over a misunderstanding I had constructed out of circumstantial evidence and whatever my sister had been putting in my head. Beatrice put her hand on his forearm, a reflex, brief and practiced. It told me everything about the duration of whatever this was more clearly than anything she had said. "Good afternoon," I said. I opened the front door. They left. I closed the door. I leaned against it with both hands flat on the wood, and I stood there until my breathing came back to something normal. My legs were shaking slightly. My heart was loud, but I had not given an inch. I called Renee that evening to document the visit. She told me I had done exactly right and to write down everything said as accurately as I could. I wrote 4 pages in the notepad I'd started keeping in my bedside table. Then I called June. My sister is 58 and lives in Guelph, and has the particular quality of being someone who tells you what she actually thinks in a way that manages not to be cruel. We had talked regularly throughout all of this, but I hadn't told her everything until that night. I told her everything: the gym bag, the deed, Renee, Theodore's report, the visit that afternoon. I talked for nearly 2 hours and she listened without interrupting, which is not always her way. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Lorraine," she said, "I want to tell you something. Do you remember 2 summers ago when you canceled on Dad's birthday gathering in Guelph? You called me and said the timing was bad and Gordon thought the drive was too much. And I remember thinking, you didn't sound like yourself. You sounded like a woman who was apologizing for taking up space." I had to put the phone down for a moment. She came to Oakville the following weekend with a bag for 2 weeks and a very good bottle of Niagara Red and the settled, practical energy of someone who intended to see a through. I also, during those weeks, found something I hadn't looked for: a separation support group for women over 40 at the community center on Wednesday evenings. The first night I went, I sat in the circle and listened, and I felt for the first time in months that my situation was not evidence of exceptional foolishness. A woman named Gloria, who had been through something strikingly similar, a husband, separately held real estate, a long parallel arrangement, was 2 years on the other side of it. The hardest part, she told me afterward over bad coffee from a machine in the corridor, is separating his dishonesty from your own judgment. He lied. That doesn't make you someone who can't see clearly. It makes him someone who worked very hard to make you not see clearly. Those are different things. I thought about that sentence for a long time. The settlement offer came by letter through Gordon's lawyer, a man named Andrew Fillion of Fillion Graves LLP in Mississauga. The letter was carefully worded, and the substance was this: Gordon was prepared to settle without going to court. He would offer me the Oakville home, which carried a mortgage of $220,000, plus a lump sum of $80,000, plus spousal support of $2,000 per month for 5 years. I read it at my kitchen table. June was in the backyard with her coffee. I did the math on a notepad. The Oakville home had a current market value of approximately $940,000, leaving equity of roughly $720,000 after the mortgage. Add $80,000. Add 5 years of spousal support, $120,000. Total approximately $920,000 against what Theodore had identified. The Burlington property with equity of roughly $270,000, the proceeds from the Stony Creek condo, and the Brantford rental, somewhere between $350,000 and $400,000, and the line of credit activity that suggested additional undisclosed liquidity. The total picture of assets subject to equalization was, by Theodore's conservative estimate, in the range of $1.3 to $1.5 million. I was being offered considerably less than half, structured in a way that left the most liquid and least visible assets entirely with Gordon. I took the letter to Renee. She read it and said, without inflection, "He's hoping you haven't done the math." "I've been a bookkeeper for 20 years, I said. She almost smiled. "Reject it," I told her. She drafted the rejection and sent it that afternoon. Gordon's response came not through Philion, but in person, 3 days later. He let himself in with his key, which he was still legally entitled to do. He sat at the kitchen table with his hands folded in the careful way he had, and he said he wanted to talk without lawyers. I sat across from him. I waited. He said he had done a lot of thinking. He said the Burlington arrangement had grown beyond what he had intended. He said Beatrice had understood from the beginning that his marriage was his priority and that things had become complicated in a way he hadn't managed well. He said that what he had built for us, for our retirement, for a future he had been planning to explain when the time was right. He said he missed his wife. He looked at me with the eyes of a man I had known for 16 years, and he said, "Lorraine, we're not old yet, but we're not young either. Do we want to spend the next several years of our lives on this?" It was well constructed. I'll acknowledge that. The version of me who had believed the roof couldn't be replaced, who had told Melissa it was fine. I couldn't make Ottawa, who had watched Portugal come and go from a distance. That version might have wavered. I poured myself more coffee. "Gordon," I said, "you maintained a separate financial life for at least 8 years. You purchased real estate with another woman during our marriage, using funds that are subject to equalization under Ontario law. You let me believe we couldn't afford ordinary things while you built a separate property portfolio, and now you want me to call that a complication that got out of hand." I paused. "I don't believe you plan to explain anything to me. I think you planned for this to remain invisible. I think the plan was to have a different life available to you, fully built, when you decided you were ready to use it." He said nothing. "Beatrice is 45, I said. I had looked her up. You're 60. The timeline on what you were constructing isn't particularly difficult to read." He left without another word. I called June in from the backyard and told her. She opened the Niagara Red even though it was 2:30 in the afternoon. I considered this entirely appropriate. The case management conference was in January in an Ontario courthouse in Hamilton. I had never been in a courtroom as a participant before. It was a quieter room than I expected, with fluorescent lighting, and the atmosphere of a place where a great many people had said difficult true things. I wore a gray blazer and the small silver earrings Melissa had given me for my 50th birthday. Melissa was in the gallery behind me, and June beside her, and knowing they were there was something I could feel like a physical thing. Renee stood beside me at the applicant's table with the stillness of total preparation. Gordon was at the opposite table in a dark suit. He did not look at me when I came in. He was performing the composure of a man with nothing to account for, in the way he had performed things for a long time. Beatrice was in the gallery behind him. Theodore Barnes presented his forensic analysis. He was methodical and clear, and he walked the court through 8 years of parallel financial activity, the sequencing of the properties, the line of credit draws and repayments, the estimated proceeds from the disposed properties, the current Burlington equity, the motions court judge, A man in his 50s who wore his reading glasses slightly low on his nose wrote carefully throughout. Andrew Fillion offered Gordon's counter-narrative. The properties Gordon's maintained had been ceded by a personal injury settlement Gordon had received 12 years ago, prior to the period of the marriage's financial commingling. A personal injury settlement, he argued, could be characterized as separate property not subject to equalization. It was prepared and plausible. Renee asked Fillion to confirm the amount and date of the settlement. Fillion confirmed. $280,000, received 11 and a half years ago. Renee produced the subpoenaed records from the financial institutions on holding the settlement funds. The settlement had been deposited, and the account had been drawn to a balance of less than $4,000 within 22 months. The full amount had been spent before the first property was purchased. The first property transaction on record used a draw from the joint line of credit I had co-signed without understanding what I was co-signing. Fillion asked for a brief recess. The judge granted 15 minutes. I sat in my chair and felt not triumphant exactly, but level. The particular sensation of something that has been tilted for a long time coming back to horizontal. When they returned, Fillion informed the court that his client was open to revisiting the settlement framework. Renee looked at me. I gave a small nod. Mrs. Whitfield remains open to settlement discussions, Renee said. However, in light of the forensic record, our position on equalization has been updated. She slid a document across to Fillion. He read it. Gordon read it over his shoulder, and his face moved through several things I watched carefully and felt I had earned the right to observe. Beatrice leaned forward and said something quietly. He shook his head. She said it again. "Are we proceeding or negotiating?" the judge said. "Negotiating," said Fillion. "We'll need an hour." The negotiation happened down the hall. A round table, institutional chairs, a whiteboard with numbers from someone else's matter still faintly visible underneath. Gordon sat across from me. It was the first time in months we had been in a room as something like equals, neither of us in the other's house or on the other's ground. He looked tired, not performed tiredness. Tired in the way of a person whose version of events has stopped being available to him. Beatrice was not in the room. Theodore had identified her as a co-signatory on the Burlington title, and Fillion had, apparently, counseled her to wait in the corridor. Fillion opened with a revised framework, equalization based on the Burlington property equity only, excluding the proceeds from the prior dispositions on the grounds that they predated the period covered by the subpoenas. Renee said Theodore's report addressed the linked financial chain across all three properties and that the forensic trail was part of the court record. They went back and forth. Gordon said something low to Fillion. Fillion put his hand briefly on Gordon's forearm, the same gesture Beatrice had used in my living room. Gordon surrounded, I thought, by people physically restraining him from his own impulses. I found this grimly clarifying. We negotiated for 55 minutes. The final terms, the Oakville home, free and clear, with Gordon assuming the remaining mortgage balance, $380,000 transferred within 45 days, representing equalization of the net family property as documented, spousal support of $4,000 per month for 8 years, reflecting my reduced earning capacity during the marriage and my years of unpaid household contribution, and, at Renee's insistence, a provision that any tax liability arising from the structure or disposition of the investment properties was Gordon's sole responsibility. Theodore had flagged that the property transactions, particularly the unreported gains, carried potential CRA exposure that was not trivial. When Philion registered the tax provision, Gordon's expression did something I hadn't seen before. Not anger. Something more like the recognition of how comprehensively a plan can fail. He signed the final separation agreement on a Wednesday afternoon in March. Renee called me from her office. "It's done," she said. I was in the kitchen. The backyard was bare and muddy, still fully winter. I had been thinking for weeks about what I wanted to plant in the spring. Not what made sense or what was practical. What I actually wanted. "Thank you," I told her. I expected to feel enormous relief, or grief, or some operatic version of closure. What I felt was quieter than that. It felt like a window being opened in a room that had been shut for a very long time. June was in the living room. She appeared in the kitchen doorway and looked at my face. "Done?" she said. "Done," I said. She sat across from me and held both my hands in both of hers, and we sat there for a long while without saying anything, and it was entirely enough. Beatrice Kowalski's position in all of this had not resolved the way she might have hoped. The Burlington property, the asset she held title on, the investment she had co-signed for and presumably expected to benefit from, was substantially consumed by the equalization payment and the CRA liability assessment that followed. What remained belonged to Gordon, not to her. Whatever arrangement they had built, on the Saturdays when I was not watching, on the Thursday evenings at Archer's table, on the foundation of my canceled trips and my missed milestones and my 16 years of being told to be careful, that arrangement had not produced the return either of them had planned on. I thought, more than once, that we had made the same error in different directions. I had trusted without looking. She had planned without accounting for the variable of what happens when someone finally does. Spring came, and I planted what I had wanted for years. A proper kitchen garden, but also for the first time, flowers. Dahlias along the back fence. A row of sweet peas against the garage. A climbing rose that everyone who knows anything about roses told me was overly ambitious for Oakville. I planted it anyway. By July, it had reached the second fence rail, and I considered this a promising sign. Melissa came for a long weekend in June. She sat at my kitchen table while I cooked, and we talked properly, without the careful atmospheric management that had been present in this house for as long as she could remember. She told me that she had always found Gordon's control of things unsettling, and that she had never known how to say it. "You could have," I said. "I know," she said, "but I think I needed you to know it first." We let that sit for a moment. Then she helped me set the table. I flew to Vancouver in August. My nephew's wedding had been 3 years ago, the one I'd missed, because Gordon said the flights were too expensive. He and his wife had their first baby in June, and they sent a photo, and I decided I was not going to meet that baby on a screen. The flights were not, it turned out, expensive. I went back to something I had set aside in the years of managing Gordon's household. I had always been good at making things, furniture refinishing, the kind of careful, methodical work that requires patience and attention and rewards both. I signed up for a woodworking course at a community studio in Burlington, 2 evenings a week. The instructor, a woman in her 60s named Pat, told me after the second session that I had good hands. I thought about that for days. I joined Gloria's group properly, not as someone in crisis, but as someone with 2 years of distance and something useful to offer. We met on Wednesday evenings and sometimes afterward at a cafe down the street. And those evenings became something I looked forward to in the uncomplicated way of things that are genuinely good. Gordon sold the Burlington property the following spring to cover his costs. The CRA matter, it turned out, had not gone smoothly. Theodore's forensic report had been thorough, and when the findings were shared with the relevant parties, the exposure on the unreported gains was substantial. Gordon's remaining assets covered it, but not comfortably. The careful, separate life he had constructed had cost him, in the end, considerably more than half of it. He moved to Burlington not long after. I heard this through Keith next door, who told me without editorializing, in the direct way of someone who has been a neighbor long enough to know that the least said is best. I felt, when I heard, nothing in particular, not satisfaction and not sorrow. Something closer to the feeling you have when a chapter ends and you're already 3 pages into the next one. Melissa came back in October. We raked leaves on a Saturday afternoon and talked about nothing important for 2 hours, which was everything. Lily, my sister June's granddaughter, was visiting for the weekend, and she spent the entire afternoon running through the leaf piles I had just finished raking. I watched her and thought about all the Saturday afternoons there would be now. What I know now that I didn't know when I found that envelope in the gym bag is this. The moment I stopped being afraid to look at my own life clearly, I stopped being easy to deceive. That clarity was there the whole time. I had simply been taught, slowly and systematically, not to use it. The day I used it again, everything changed. I was 53 years old. I had not managed my own finances in 16 years. I had a bookkeeper's brain and no legal knowledge, and a plan that felt enormous in the gray dawn when I was making it alone. I did it anyway. If you're sitting somewhere right now half knowing something you've been telling yourself isn't there, I want you to know. Looking is allowed. Looking is the first thing. What would you have done sitting in that front hallway? If this story reached you, leave me a comment. Tell me where you're listening from. Share it with someone who might need it. And thank you, honestly, for being here.